Hey, are you ready to get on the water this spring, but muddy water just isn't your thing? Well, then you came to the right place. My name's Jordan, and I'm going to help you figure it out. Let's get started. So muddy or stained water is probably one of the most consistent water conditions that you're going to have to deal with in the springtime, especially early spring with all this inconsistent weather that we have. You never know from one day to another if it's going to rain a little, rain a lot, or rain enough to ruin your fishing trip this weekend. But one thing's for certain, whenever it comes to early spring, you're going to deal with rain. And with rain comes stained or even muddy water. And if you're going to want to get out in the water and have a chance at catching a fish this time of year, you're going to have to learn to fish around it. And not only will learning to fish around muddy water give you more of a chance to get out in the water earlier in the year, but it will also make you a way more well-rounded angler, because honestly, some of the biggest bites that you can get can come out of muddy or stained water. It allows for a whole different presentation. It allows for you not to really have to worry about certain positionings as much. There's just so much more that goes on with a heavy stained or even muddy water that can actually put things to your benefit. So I'm going to talk about 3 of my favorite baits to use in stained or muddy water. And those 3 baits are a spinnerbait, a chatterbait, and a squarebill crankbait. And you're going to notice that all 3 of those baits have a few things in common. Number 1, they're a moving, aggressive bait. Number 2, they displace a bunch of water. And number 3, they make a bunch of noise. But before I go into specifics about each one of these baits, like weight selection, color selection, or modifications that I like to make to get a few more hookups, I really want to discuss with you all about why I choose these baits. And the same 3 things that these baits all have in common are the same 3 reasons that I like to choose these baits. They cover a lot of water, they displace a lot of water, and they make a lot of noise. And you might be asking yourself, why is covering a lot of water important? Or why is water displacement important? Or, why is noise really important in muddy or stained water conditions? Well, the first part of that, we'll just break it down one by one. The first part of that, the reason a moving bait is important. Well, whenever you get muddy or stained water, the first part of the water that's going to clear up is typically around the edges of the banks. So you're not really going to be able to sight fish. These fish obviously aren't up on bed. You're not going to be able to rely a whole lot on live scope whenever you're right up against the bank. So in general, just being able to cover water will put the odds more in your favor to find out where the concentrations of bass are, or even if there is concentrations. A lot of these fish might be isolated in cover, trying to find good ambush points to be able to, ambush bait fish and stuff like that. So the more water you're able to cover, the more you're going to put the odds in your favor of being able to hook up. So the second thing being water displacement. The reason water displacement is extremely important in stained or muddy water conditions because the bass simply can't see. And whenever the bass can't see, they use their lateral senses to sense things around them, which allows them to essentially feel noise and vibration, right? It allows them to find bait fish near them. It allows them to get away from predator fish. Their lateral senses are what the bass heavily rely on whenever it comes to low visibility. So by displacing a bunch of water with something like this blade on a bladed jig, you're going to draw in the bass's curiosity. It's going to sense that in its area, and it's going to draw to it. Just like if you were in your house in the dark and there was something going on, some kind of commotion, it's going to draw your curiosity. You're going to go try to figure out what that is, which easily leads me into the third thing, which is noise. And noise and displacement almost go hand in hand, because just like the displacement of the water is going to draw the bass's curiosity, so is the noise. For example, and I'll get into this in a lot more detail here in a second, but like on a spinnerbait with a Colorado blade, you're displacing a lot of water and you're causing a big loud thumping noise. That's going to draw the bass's curiosity, and it's going to cause a reaction strike, which is how you're most likely going to get all of your bites whenever it comes to muddy water or stained water. So now that we've discussed why I like to use these baits, let's discuss the baits themselves. And I'm just going to go over weight selection, color selection, or at least with the spinnerbait and the chatterbait. I'm going to go over weight selection, color selection, trailer selection, and with the squarebill, I'll just go over color selection, line selection, a few basics with this. So let's start off with the spinnerbait. Now, a spinnerbait is obviously not just a muddy water or a stained water bait. A spinnerbait works really good in a lot of different conditions, a lot of different time of year, whether it's clear water in windy conditions or cloudy conditions or stuff like that. It really depends on what is going on. The spinnerbait is also a shining star whenever it comes to muddy or stained water fishing. and in particular, something with a Colorado blade. Now, the reason you want a Colorado blade for muddy water fishing as opposed to something like this blue rock spinnerbait right here that has a willow leaf on it is because a willow leaf more helps use visual sense. It looks more like a bait fish swimming through the water, whereas Colorado blades, they displace a lot of water. They make a lot of noise. They help the fish dial in on the bait using their lateral senses as opposed to their visual senses. So one of the first things you want to look for in a muddy water spinnerbait is a big old thumping spoon on it. And honestly, the bait that I even pulled out for this video, I just didn't have one in my tackle box out here today that was even big enough for what I would like to use. But honestly, I would look for something with a bigger spoon on it than that, because you're not going to hurt yourself by displacing more water or making a louder noise. It'll honestly help you hone in on those bigger bass, trying to look for something to feed on. Now, when it comes to color selection, or like the color of the skirting material that you're going to use, and this is going to be a common theme that you see throughout all three of these baits, me personally, and this is just me personally, I know somebody's going to come at me and attack me with, hey, you know, I use this color, I use that color, but this is me personally. I like more vibrant, brighter colored baits to help get any kind of visual sense that I can out of the fish. I really think that it helps strike or cause more reaction bites in muddy water. The only time I really stray away from bright, vibrant colors in muddy water is whenever I go to black and blue, and that's just because honestly, black and blue just works good anywhere, anytime, all the time, in any water condition whatsoever. Black and blue, you can never count out black and blue. But for me personally, when I start fishing in muddy or stained water, I really like to go with chartreuses, reds, whites, anything that I really think is going to pop out in that muddy water to that bass, to where if by off chance they didn't get the vibration from it or they didn't hear it, maybe the color of it can really help strike a reaction bite out of the fish. Now, whenever it comes to my weight selection for the spinnerbait or even for the chatterbait, since they have so much in common whenever it's going to come to your weight selection or your color selection, I really like to stick to a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce weight. And I know some of you might be thinking, like, well, Jordan, why is weight selection overly important whenever it comes to stained or muddy water? And the reason behind that is you're not going for a finesse presentation, so you're really wasting your time with a 1/4 ounce because you can't cover as much water with it. Again, you're not going for a finesse presentation, so there's no need to use that lighter weight spinnerbait or chatterbait. So in my mind, by using a heavier bait, you're able to get it out there more, you're able to cover more water. And ultimately with a heavier bait, you're going to displace more water as well. So to me, I stay away from the 1/4 ounce or smaller spinnerbaits or chatterbaits, and I really like to stick to a 3/8 or a 1/2 ounce weight. So at this point in the video, you're probably starting to think to yourself, well, the chatterbait and the spinnerbait really have a lot in common. Why are you even doing two different sections on both different baits as much as they have in common? And I'll agree with you, the baits do have a lot in common, but they do have a few really distinct differences that make them completely different presentations altogether. And one of them is going to be the trailer that I like to use. Now, for a spinnerbait, I really like a big paddle tail swim bait of some sort in muddy water to help cause more displacement, and not even so much to give a bait fish presentation, just more or less because I really like the thumping action and the water displacement that it causes. Don't get me wrong, certain conditions, I'm all for using a swim bait on a chatterbait. But for muddy water and for this video, it's not what I'm after. So especially whenever it comes to this style of fishing, there's a few distinct differences that in my mind make a big difference to what your outcome might be. Whenever it comes to how I like to set up my trailer on my spinnerbait, I went over this in other videos with y'all, but I'll just show it again here real quick. All I do is I like to thread the bait up onto the hook, like you see right here, right? And then whenever I get to a point where I can just pop it out and still have a nice little bait like that, flip it up over. Now, the one thing that I always like to point out whenever I show people how I put a trailer on is I always like to have my paddle tail facing the opposite direction away from my blades, because that helps provide more of a kicking action. It's going to help displace more water. It's going to cause more noise. And in muddy water, that's going to help you get more bites. So now let's talk about chatterbaits. And I know that I just mentioned about how much spinnerbaits and chatterbaits had in common, and I'm going to try to skip past as much of that repetitive information as I can, and just get to the key differences with these baits. But obviously, I don't want to miss a whole lot of information on these chatterbaits, so some of this information might be a tiny bit repetitive. The first thing, I guess, that would be a big difference here, something I like to change up from the spinnerbait, is my color selection. And I know I just mentioned that all these baits, I like the same colors. I like bright, vibrant colors. And that is true. I still might use like a chartreuse or something like that. But I think that this red, especially for the type of presentation that I'm trying to offer with a chatterbait, it's a nice, vibrant color, but it offers the presentation that I'm trying to give, or it goes more along the lines with what I'm trying to throw. And like I mentioned before, black and blue is just a hard color to get away from. So whenever I'm throwing a chatterbait in muddy water, I keep it pretty simple with my color selection to either a red color like this, especially in the early spring, or a black and blue color like this. The next key difference between a chatterbait and a spinnerbait is going to be my trailer selection. And for me personally, especially when I'm fishing muddy water, whenever I'm trying to give this style of presentation, I really like some sort of creature bait like this rage grub right here. Now, I know a lot of you are saying, well, I've seen people throw swim baits on chatterbaits before, and don't get me wrong, I like to throw swim baits on chatterbaits, especially if the conditions are right. But whenever I'm trying to fish a chatterbait in muddy water, essentially the presentation that I'm trying to present is like I'm fishing a jig, only with some noise added to it. I'm not really swimming it like I would be a swim bait. That's why I say that I'm trying to offer two different presentations here. So I try to offer more of some kind of a crawfish presentation by hopping it on the bottom and kind of jigging it on the bottom whenever I'm using a chatterbait. So when it comes to my trailer selection, I usually select some sort of creature bait like this here. But, you know, same again whenever it comes to how I put the bait on there. Simply just, again, I want to thread it up on there like so. I want to pop it out, and, you know, that's not the prettiest, but there you go. There's your trailer. Whenever it comes to the weight selection, like I mentioned before, this is one of the repetitive parts. 3/8 and ½ ounce, especially, and honestly, I stay more to ½ ounce because I'm really trying to hop this bait along the bottom. Instead of fishing it through the water column like I am with a spinnerbait, a chatterbait, I'm really trying to keep it on bottom. I'm really wanting to hop it around whatever kind of cover or structure there is on the bottom. And I'm wanting it to displace a bunch of water and make a bunch of noise while it's down there. And that's why I'm not just simply fishing with a jig. And finally, with the chatterbait, something I didn't mention with a spinnerbait is my line selection. And this is one of those things that both of them want to have in common, but I like to stick to a heavier weight line. I really like to stay with something like a 14 or an 18-pound test fluorocarbon. And the reason behind that, it's not just muddy water or clear water when it comes to that. A lot of times when you're fishing with a spinnerbait or a chatterbait, you're going to be fishing around a lot of heavy cover. It's going to be in places where it can get nicked up. It's going to be near grass. And honestly, these baits produce bigger bites. So putting yourself with a heavier line, it's just going to help secure the chance that you get that fish in the boat. And don't worry about the line maybe taken away from bites, because honestly, whenever it comes to a lot of these really fast, heavier moving baits like this, if you think about the fish, you're never going to see the line. The line's not going to make a whole lot of difference unless you go with something way too heavy, something crazy, you know, like a 50-pound test or something like that. So with all that being said, let's roll right into the final bait, and probably one of my favorite baits to fish with, not just in muddy water, but during year-round. A squarebill crankbait is probably one of my favorite way to fish. I probably have like 6 boxes of squarebills in the boat at any given time, depending on what time of season it is. So I love squarebill fishing, not only because it's just fun, you get to cover a lot of water, it's aggressive, but honestly because it catches a lot of fish of all different sizes. I've had just as many days going out and catching a bunch of small 12, 14-inch bass on little squarebills as I've had having days where you catch, you know, a decent bass with a squarebill crankbait. So it can catch fish from any size. It's a good productive bait, and it's a fun bait to fish with. And the reason I like it this time of year, especially in muddy water or heavy stained water, is because all a crankbait does is disrupt the water. It's there to make noise, it's there to cause a commotion, and it's just going to really drive home those reaction bites that you're looking for. When it comes to the color selection that I like for a squarebill crankbait in muddy water, you know, as you can see with this one here, I really like to stick to, you know, chartreuse colors or white colors. But again, we're back to those bright, vibrant colors to try to help get any sort of visual sense that you can off of those fish, to help with any, you know, increasing your odds of getting a bite. There really is no modifications I make to a squarebill crankbait, other than depending on what brands I buy. Might replace the hooks with some hooks that I trust a little bit more. But the biggest thing whenever it comes to a square bill crankbait, in my opinion, that is going to matter on your end outside of just overall buying a good brand of crankbait is line selection. Now, I just mentioned that with the spinnerbait and the chatterbait that I like to use a heavier gauge line, but for a square bill crankbait, because it's not as heavy as a chatterbait or a spinnerbait, you know, this thing ain't 3/8 of an ounce. I like to use a lighter weight line. I don't go above 8-pound test fluorocarbon whenever it comes to square bill crankbait, because I think that once you go into the 10-pound test range, you take a lot of that essential action away from the square bill crankbait that you're looking for, and I think you take away from a lot of the action that's going to get you bites. So I know this is contradictory to what I just said, but with a square bill crankbait, set your drag a little bit looser. Obviously, don't be in a hurry to get the fish in. Take your time fighting it, but it's really crucial, in my opinion, that you use a lighter weight line, like I said, a 6-pound or an 8-pound test. Well, I really hope you all enjoyed my 3 favorite baits and the few tips that I had to offer on muddy water fishing. My name's Jordan, and if you enjoyed that experience, make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button, and I'll see y'all next time.